Hi there, and welcome to another episode where we're going to be looking at the pages from the Gospel of Matthew. Last time we were on this page where we were talking about the temptations of Christ here, and so we've got the devil who's come, and Christ in the desert for 40 days, 40 nights, whatever. The in this, and we were talking about the fact that in this one, Matthew, we get some of the words and everything for the temptations, and whereas in Mark, we had this image, but actually, all it said was, and Satan tempted him. They didn't give us any details. This one, I said last time, shows all the. It's supposed to show a representation of all the kingdoms in the world. Obviously, there's only 6, but sort of all different areas of the globe. So there's China, India, Egypt, Rome, and also like Celtic, Gaul, and places like that. In the centre as well as the temple at Jerusalem, and we have all the idols around the outside. And like I say last time, there's a video where I go into all the details about the idols and the kingdoms and everything, which we'll link below. And then this is the page we're going to be talking about now, new one. So Jesus says to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Again, in the Gospel of Mark, on this page, we don't get the any of the text or what Jesus is saying. So in Mark, the comic, it just says on the previous page, he's tempted by Satan, and then and he was with the wild animals, and the angels were serving him. In Matthew, then we get to have the words. So it says, "Away from me, Satan." So what so in the last book, the idea was so it didn't have the words I say. Oh, come on. And so it's like this, and the idea was that the image itself would people be able to tell that he's saying, "Come on," saying something like "go away," and then he's turning away, annoyed. So yeah. Now, then the angels come to comfort him, and again we have the cherubim drawn this way. The blog about how I drew the cherubim and how I decided to sort of design them to try and be as biblically accurate as possible, but obviously having to use artistic interpretation. You'll see that you've got overlaid elements where the different faces are overlaid with one another. You can see a horn here because one of the heads is like an ox, and then this one's like a wing, because the one that I have with the eagle head, it's got like these wing ears, like this one has on his head. The eyes, there's lots of eyes, and then so this one is sort of like he's facing that way, and he's also facing forwards, and then he's also facing this way, but there's no head on that side, or and it's and as I say, it's overlaid with one another. So you've got his clothes and his body sort of overlaid. So you've got one arm here, but then you've got like his chest, but then he's got like a second chest here, sort of overlaid. And again, he's got the wings, and the wings are not completely corporeal. So this part is kind of like nothing there. But up here, there's all the shapes, and they're supposed to be suggestive of like eyes, because it says they had eyes all over them. And so we've done the eyes like the glowing eyes without pupils, but so that if somebody saw them, they might think, oh yeah, they're like eyes. And additionally, they're a bit like stars. And in the background, of course, I've put the stars, and it makes it so it sort of all blends together in a way. And so the eyes are a bit like stars, and they, so they kind of go together as well. and then of course, angels are sometimes called sort of stars, and there's star-like references to them in the actual Bible itself. So that's another reason to make the eyes a bit like glowing, circles or whatever, like stars. Again, this one has some clothes here, and then he has a kind of a clothes thing going on here, where it's like he's wearing like a robe or a cloak or something that's kind of just going. But you'll notice that that it's not necessarily a cloak. It's supposed to be sort of confusing. This is like a robe. This is like a toga or something. But this, what is it? Is it a cloak? Is it just and then he doesn't really have any legs. It's just kind of swoosh, and then that's it. Or is it a wing? Or that's the idea. Is kind of he's there, but he's not there. And then same on this side. He's got a big wing, and he's got his wing, and his wing is also kind of going around Jesus like that, sort of. He's sheltering him in his wings. Again, he's got this underneath like toga, or is it his body? And again, he's got this. His legs kind of disappear into this. On him, it looks a bit more like a blanket or whatever, and it just just kind of covers him. And again, his arm comes down, but then he doesn't really have a hand. It's behind Jesus, but it's just faded out. You'll notice as well that although on this one the lines are actually quite distinct, what I often do is they fade out as well. Can you see at the edge of the pages they sort of fade in and out? So this one again, it just goes around him and then it sort of fades out on this side. The lions are there. That's because of, like I say, the Mark verse which says that he was with the wild animals, but you'll notice that although they're lions and they're wild, they're not attacking him. And again, this was something that I did in Mark, but again, it kind of points us back to Daniel and the lion's den and that sort of thing, where Jesus is he's the creator, so the lions don't want to attack him. He's got power over the animals and things like that. Okay, then we've got the blank page, which indicates in this case a time hop forwards, because we skip over a little bit of time. So this is the temptations, obviously, and then we know from John, it's the wedding at Cana, and then there's a whole bunch of ministry in John which is skipped over by the others. And Matthew and Mark both then say when Jesus heard about John being persecuted, and it just jumps in at that point. And when you just read it in the gospel, you think, oh, it's like he went and did his wilderness wandering thing, and then he came back and he heard about John, because there's nothing to say that there's like a time lapse. But from the other books that there are, and when you actually know that there is, you can then look at the text again and be like, oh, it's not saying that when Jesus finished being tempted he found out about John. It's saying when Jesus found out about John, which is actually 6 months later or whatever. So it in Mark and Matthew, at least, they do skip out that portion. I think must do in Luke as well, because obviously it's only John really that then goes into the wedding at Cana and those following events. But again, this one, you'll notice that there's a bit of a reshuffle on how it was in Mark. This is the Mark page. In the Mark one, we had Herod giving the order, and then John being arrested, and then it goes on to Jesus came into the Galilee preaching the good news of the kingdom. In Matthew, it says when he heard about the arrest, but in prison, leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum, which was by the lake, in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali. And then we've got the map, so it's sort of significant that it's telling us where he went to and from, and it's not just saying, it says the Galilee here, but then it gives us more details here. So you've got the map up here where you've got Capernaum, and then Nazareth is down here, and this is the Jezreel Valley and the Galilee. Then we got a silhouette of Jesus on his way, and I've given him a staff. Once in a while, Jesus has a staff in the comic, something that you don't often see him with, but I thought it was reasonable. Some of the verses seem to assume that the disciples will have staffs, like when he says to take just a staff and things like that. And he does do a lot of walking, so I thought, well, and then there's obviously the Psalm 23, is it? Well, your rod and staff to comfort me and all that. So I just thought it'd be good to show Jesus with a staff. Then now in Matthew, I think, is this the first? No, it's not the first one, is it? But he says this happened, and then he goes, oh, and by the way, this was to fulfill this prophecy or this thing. And he says it quite often. I've decided to use the black panels for this so that to just highlight them and make them more pronounced than just by putting it into yellow or anything like that. I thought it would stand out, and so that actually happens quite a lot in Matthew. He'll just go, by the way, this is to fulfill this other thing. So he says about Zebulun and Naphtali. And actually this is why, funnily enough, if you've watched the video about how I designed the disciples and that, you might have picked up on the fact that that Andrew and Peter wear green, right? So they're here, and there'll be more on the next page, but they have this green. That's because I decided to, we don't know, pitch them as people of Zebulun, and so Zebulun is his symbol. Particularly in the Old Testament, but his symbol is the boat, and then on the kind of I'm lost for a better word than heraldry, but on the people's cloaks, I draw people's hems and things to represent their clan and things like that. And so we don't know what clan they were from, but I've done it so they were from Zebulun, and that's because it says that they're in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali and Capernaum. Interestingly, I think that's a change from the Old Testament, or not a change, but there's been a development apparently of shifting of the borders of the tribes. So if we look, I need to make it a bit bigger. This is in Joshua, Naphtali. So that's that area, and it includes Capernaum. And then this one's Zebulun, which is got Kana in it, and is over here. So it's sort of north of the Jezreel Valley, and then what would it be, west of the Galilee and stuff. So it seems as though, but it's saying that it's the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. So even though it seems more securely in Naphtali on this map, by this time, 2,000 years later or whatever, 1,500 years later, they are. It says it's like a joint, the area of Zebulun and Naphtali. I guess Nazareth is, but it's saying about the lake being in Naphtali, which it's not, if Naphtali ends over the side. But anyway, so there's obviously shifting borders over the 1,000 odd years. And then it says, and then we have the bit, so Jesus came and began to preach, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is come near. And I've used the narration here again as speech. And then we've got the slightly different way that it reads in Mark's Gospel. It says the time is fulfilled, for God's kingdom is at hand, repent and believe the good news. So it's essentially the same, but slightly different, but because it's essentially the same. That's why I've used it in the same image with them saying the same thing. Then we hear about when Jesus comes and meets with Peter and everybody. So it's Jesus walking beside the lake. He saw the two brothers, Simon and Peter. Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew, and were casting nets. Here again, they are doing a type of fishing where they use these casting nets, where you stand on the seashore and you cast them in like this. In the background, you can see a drag net, which is being cleaned by the serving people of these guys. So Peter and Andrew and James and John seem to have a fishing company, but they have people who work for them as well, because it says that they've got servants. So they're not super poor or anything, but they've got this business. So you can see them all doing that, and then there's like seaweed here caught in it and rocks and stuff, and they're fixing the nets, and we'll know that what they call Peter and James and John will also be fixing nets, because that's part of what it says about them. So so we've got the boats here. The two boats are basically similar, but these are the boats that they then obviously go in later and take Jesus around in. And when I was drawing it, I was quite surprised actually how much time they spend in boats and getting around. And it makes sense because obviously if you want to go somewhere far away, it's much easier to jump in a boat and go like over a river or lake than it is to walk all the way around. So it's just like a much better mode of transport, and so that's how they get about. Here, this is Peter, Andrew, and I'll go into more about the character designs here. You can see Peter's not got his cloak on, but he's got this key on his belt, and that's because in the Catholic iconography, Peter's shown with a key, and I just thought, why not? He's got a key to a house or something. And also, they do spend a lot of time in his house, so it makes sense. Here, like Mark, exactly the same. We split out a word here, so it's like they were casting their nets in the lake, and I used for they were fishermen, and then I show them in a boat, because we learn from Luke that this scenario where in Matthew and Mark it looks like Jesus kind of comes up and just says, "Hey, follow me," and then they leave their nets and they go. We learn in Luke that they catch miraculous fish is what happens here. So he comes up, he talks to them, he preaches, he says, "Put your net on the side." They bring up all the fish, and then Peter's like, "Oh, not worthy," and that's why here in this picture at the top, Jesus is speaking to them. They've got all the fish inside the boat already, and he's saying, "I'm not worthy," and he's saying, "Follow me," and Andrew's like, "Yes," and Peter's like, "I'm not worthy." So that's how it is here. You can see as well Jesus has taken his cloak off, and they all have, because in the boat you don't want to fall in the water wrapped in a cloak. And in the background the hills were drawn from the real Galilee landscape. All the little fish as well are drawn from real fishes that are of the area. And so once they left their nets and followed him, going on from there, they saw the two other brothers, James and son of Zebedee, and John. They were in the boat with their father preparing their nets. Jesus called, and in one of the Gospels, I think it says that they're fixing their nets, and then in this one, I think it's saying prepared, but it's basically the same thing. So I think probably they're fixing them. And fixing them is under the broad category of being prepared. But this is their father Zebedee then in the boat, and they're meeting Jesus, and he's calling them, and now The other thing to say is that it's possible that, it's not the first ever time they've met Jesus ever. For Andrew, it's certainly not, because in John's Gospel, which is what I was bringing this on up for, we learn that John was a disciple of John the Baptist, so he was there then. Actually, that's just reminded me that in Acts, when they pick a new disciple to fill the 12, they've picked Matthias. One of the criteria is that the disciple should have been someone who was there with John the Baptist at the baptism and stuff of I can't remember how to qualify it, but since John the Baptist, and so it's possible that actually a load of them were there when with John the Baptist when Jesus baptized or whatever. So it says again, the next day John was standing but with two disciples. He looked at Jesus who was walking, said, "Behold the Lamb of God." The two disciples heard him speak and asked, and they followed Jesus. Jesus turned and saw them following and said to them, "What are you looking for?" And they said, "Rabbi, where are you staying?" And he said to them, "Come and see." And they saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him for that day. It was about the 10th hour. One of them who heard him was Andrew, Peter's brother. He found he first found his own brother Simon and said to him, "We found the Messiah." And so we're not sure when that happens exactly. He brought him to Jesus and looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of Jonah," who called you Cephas, and Peter. So, but Andrew and one other guy meet Jesus like right at the beginning, and this is actually, again, it's before John's been captured, and it's most likely as reading the study in order of events, and actually it seems that this bit is when John says this is after Jesus has come back from the sort of wilderness. So John baptizes Jesus. Jesus goes into the wilderness, 40 days. He comes, but this is when, and then he comes back, and he has to, if you think about it, well, he doesn't have to, but he then passes John again out on his way out of the wilderness. It's likely because that John is baptizing people in the ford of the Jordan, which is down by Jericho, and Jesus, to then get across again the river, will cross there. I mean, there are other places, but that's where he is. So, but you can tell as well because he's with John, but he's going in the other direction in a way, isn't he? It's like he's not going into the wilderness is the point. Like he doesn't when Andrew and the other one follow him, they follow him to a place that he's staying. He's not staying in the wilderness. So it's going in the other direction. And so this is like, yes, it's after his fasting and everything. And so when I do draw it in John, Jesus still be very slim and, emaciated from his 40 days fast and that. And then, and then he meets Andrew, and then that's down in, it's not in the Galilee is the point, and so they meet him a long time before. Anyway, it's a bit of a tangent. These guys decide to go with him. We've got Zebedee here, and then this is Salome, or she's called Mary Salome sometimes, reading all this stuff about her in Catholic traditions and that. So you remember later she says to Jesus, "Oh, you've got to do this favour for my boys, that one will sit on the right and on the left and stuff." So she has like a whole speaking part and everything. And she's one of the ones at the tomb and stuff. So she's actually a really important character, which never like comes up in any Bible studies ever. But here she is for the first time in the book. And she's, James and John's mum. Then Jesus is preaching here. He's in the synagogue at Capernaum, and you can see, and I've dropped, so there's some archaeological evidence and stuff at Capernaum for the old synagogue that was there when Jesus was alive. I've taken that evidence, but also the evidence at places like Chorazin, where there's another one, which is, the right period, and what you can tell by comparing the one at Chorazin and the one at Capernaum is that they're basically very, very similar. And so actually you can just look at the Chorazin one, which is much more there, and say, okay, well, it's like this. So that's kind of what I've done. And so the pillars and stuff are designed and that to be like that. The other thing is that there's the black stone, this sort of dark stone. It might not even look as black here as it does in real life. Here's just a quick search for images of the Chorazin place. So you can see this sort of dark stone and the pillars and everything, and the pillars, which, like I say, we've drawn from the ones that are at Capernaum, because that's where it's supposed to be, the image, and then some of the other stuff is taken from there. And you've got the people sitting, and they're on these what would you call them, benches, but they're kind of like stone steps, like at the Colosseum or whatever. That's how they were. And then and the writing actually hides some of the things. What's wrong with that? Okay, take that away. So there's all this stuff underneath it you can't see, but it talks about, at some points, Jesus says, that the elder, like the Pharisees and everything, they like having the top spot at the synagogue, so it's like the back row where you're high up, and that's where the elder ones do. So in the image you can see there's women and younger people here at the front, and then you've got some older ones here. You can't see the top one, but they'd be older again, more venerable. Here in this image you can see standing is Jairus, whose daughter, he heals, because we know that Jesus heals the synagogue leader in Capernaum. Now, it's possible that he's not from Capernaum, but the inference, people didn't travel around quite as much. So he's the synagogue leader. It happens in Capernaum, so it stands to reason that he's the Capernaum synagogue leader. He's here then when Jesus is preaching in the synagogue, and he's standing here. He's got a scroll all wrapped up in the blue special stuff that protects it for when Jesus wants to read out the scroll, whatever. So he was teaching good news, healing the sick. And then this is a new panel. News about him spread all over Syria. Now what I've done is got an image here, again created the base image from Google Maps, and then I've treated it and taken out the words and stuff like that. But the scale is the Galilee here, and then this is the whole side of the Mediterranean right up to the top, and that is Cyprus, and so it's massive. And so this is all because obviously we have Syria today, right? But this is the province of Syria in the Roman sort of administration or whatever, and so it covers this whole bit. It's actually a little bit up there as well, and so what I wanted to do is just show the great size of it. Now it could be to some degree like hyperbole, like all over Syria. Maybe it wasn't like all over, but Galilee's here, and I'm just showing the extent to which it means, and so yeah, you can see the scale here. For example, is a map, and doesn't show you exact borders, but this is the bit we're talking about. Includes Laodicea, Antioch in there, so all around here, up there, down, I think, so Babylon, or Byblos, whatever it's called at the time, Sidon. So all included in this massive area. So it's just to kind of qualify the statement, really, with a map. Then we've got the bit where Jesus is healing everybody, but interestingly in Matthew it kind of says like he healed lots of people, and crowds came from far away. in Mark's gospel, we've got the same event essentially, but it says it in a different way. It says there's loads of people, there's a crowd, blah blah, and then he healed them. And so all I've done is just put this set of panels and that one the other way around, because it's still kind of they're simultaneous anyway. Like this one's happening on the outside, this one's happening on the inside. So so that's the way I've done that. Matthew also skips over some of the like events. So here we've got this, and then before we've got the healing of Peter's mother-in-law and the casting out of the demon in the synagogue. And that was where that image comes from. So this is an example of where, funnily enough, Mark has more information than Matthew does. Normally it's Matthew's got, the same thing with loads of extra text. Well, Matthew skips out this event, but he mentions, he was teaching in the synagogues, so I've brought in the image of him teaching in the synagogue, but then you miss the event, you don't have the pictures of the event with the demon-possessed man, and it goes straight on then to, he's healing people and there was a big crowd and stuff. So that's where it's interesting to compare, you've missed out this bit, but you've retained this image because Matthew talks about teaching in the synagogue, and then we go straight onto this bit. So that's an interesting comparison. Is the point of how the two go together, and then in a second we're going to go on to this section. But again, it doesn't talk about. It skips out the bit where it talks about Jesus gets up, and then they can't find him. It skips that bit out and it just goes, he's up on a mountain, and then he started, So we'll see you next time. And so I hope you've enjoyed this little video. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. And if you're on Patreon, thanks so much for being a patron. And we'll see you again next time. Thanks.